I wonder if his knees are spoken for. I've mentioned before that I played basketball at a pretty high level at a young age. I suppose that's just what you do when you're 6'1" and 13. And I loved the sport, had some amazing teammates, many of whom have gone on to do awesome stuff in the NBA. But unfortunately, my own basketball career was cut short at about the age of 13 or 14 because I was having a ton of knee pain and I was diagnosed with a condition called osteochondritis dissecans disease, which is essentially that where your femur bone comes into your knee, there's kind of like two balls or condyles in the joint, and the outer ones of each of my knees had pretty much just crumbled away. And it's a condition that impacts about 1 out of every million people, but I had it about as bad as one could. It was as severe a case as they'd seen, and in my case, there was no like therapy or anything. About 1 out of every 10 million people get it that badly. And so I required a bone and cartilage transplant called an osteochondrial allograft. And I learned that because even as rare as the condition is, the worldwide expert on the disease was here in Atlanta. And so we went down to his office, and he didn't have much of a bedside manner, but he just said, hey, yeah, you're gonna have to have a bunch of pretty painful surgeries, and that's the only way to fix it. But when you do, you'll be able to walk and everything else. Otherwise, I think I would have been in a wheelchair by the time I was in my mid-20s. So fortunately, that bullet's been dodged. But at the time, it was a very experimental procedure. It wasn't something anyone did all that often. And it was approved generally, but as I recall, my insurance paid like $100 for my right knee and then turned the left knee down. And so through some shrewd negotiation, I think my parents got him down to a few grand to do the left knee, and that was just a pay out of pocket thing. And so you gotta love the American health system, and it does interesting things for my legs and Nick's face, as it turns out. And it was hard for me to give up this sport that I loved. You know, I talked last week about Kevin Messer, my childhood best friend, that really introduced me to the love of cars. And as much as we were great friends, if we hadn't had as much time to spend together, particularly in those impressionable early driving years, that may never have happened. So the fact that the knees ended my basketball career and the 5-game-a-weekend distraction, that's really what's, you know, at least knocked over that first domino and led to whatever this has all become. And so I suppose we have that to thank, but it was a really, really painful process. And being on a transplant list is a really miserable thing. You can't travel far from home. You've always got to be on call to come to the hospital the next morning to have surgery. And at the time, they were really harvesting most of the bone and cartilage tissue out of a company in Florida. There wasn't anybody in Georgia that was doing it, so they all were being flown in. But of course, your grandparents don't know that. So every time there's a death in the newspaper, they call and they're like, I wonder if his knees are spoken for. So it took about 1.5 years to get the first one and about 6 more months to get the second. And my right knee, I think, is 5 years older than I am. My left knee is a couple years younger than I am. But it was an interesting kind of circumstance that now they don't really do it in exactly the same way. I actually called to have a checkup a few years ago, and the receptionist was just shocked that I'd had this happen, that I was one of the people that had this surgery. And I was like, you know, you probably ought to calm down that response a little bit because it's really horrifying from my end of this phone call. And I said, well, how many people ever had this surgery? He said, I don't know, maybe 100 or 120. So it was a pretty rare thing. And again, now it's just titanium replacement from day one. They're a little higher quality, they last longer, but mine should last the rest of my life. They still give me a little bit of issues every once in a while, but if I run around a little bit, I can usually manage to dunk a basketball. But fast forward about 10 years and I'm selling Lamborghinis at Lamborghini Atlanta. And one of my main responsibilities is to order all of our new inventory. And so I'd try to keep 2 or 3 coming each month. And we're selling a ton of Gallardos at that point. And in this point, maybe 2012, 2013, it was really not popular to order very unique colors or unique specs on cars. The resale red mentality from Ferrari had kind of permeated the whole exotic car industry, and on the Lamborghini side, they really wanted you to stick to their kind of primary color palette: green, yellow, orange if you wanted a bright color, or maybe white, black, gray if you wanted something more subtle. And those did sell well, and that was the most popular thing. And if you wanted to order something that was really off the wall, most dealers would discourage it because their theory was that not that many people are interested in having a purple Lamborghini. So you just don't see a whole lot of those in that kind of age range now looking back. But I knew that when we had a really uniquely spec'd car, even though it wasn't a mass appeal circumstance, there were more people that were interested in owning something weird than there were weird cars. And so if you had a spec that somebody really wanted, they would generally forgive other issues like a bad Carfax or some miles or some neglected service or one of these things that would normally devalue a car. They would get over that because they really wanted that color. And so when I started ordering cars, I would try to get some really unique stuff, order colors we didn't see as often and things like that. And one of the first cars that I ordered was actually a 2012 Gallardo LP 550 Spider in a color called Verde Artemis. And that was a color in 2003 that Lamborghini used to commemorate their 40th anniversary on a limited run Murcielago. And to be honest, they didn't sell that well initially. I mean, they were really pretty cars, but they sat around for a little while. But in the pre-owned market, they had become a little bit more popularly demanded, and they sold pretty well at a little bit of a premium. And so I thought this is going to be a cool color. In fact, the only model precedent I could find was, I think there was an '06 Verde Artemis Gallardo in Germany, but I think that car was crashed. So I believe this is the only LP generation Verde Artemis Gallardo in the world, and the only Verde Artemis Gallardo of any model year in the US. So it was a very special car, and it came in and we were all so excited about it. But they took kind of special attention. They sent us a color sample to verify when we ordered it. And in fact, the car got delivered without the front end lift system, which in the US had been standard since 2005. So they ended up sending it to us. We kind of repaired it as almost a warranty claim. And it was a massive operation to retrofit it. I think it took like 15 grand in parts, and the whole front had to come off the car. It was wild. But we got the car up in the showroom. And in fact, that was the first car I ever took a picture of and put on Instagram. I used some terrible filter, but I really loved it. It was just one of those cars that really appealed to me. I thought it was unique. It stood for something in the brand's heritage, but also was a really exciting and unique color. And honestly, we had some initial interest, but it kind of sat around for a little while. And my management staff was all kind of like, yeah, we told you this one wouldn't sell. I don't know what we're going to do with it. But eventually this guy wanders in and he's looking for his first Lamborghini. And he falls in love with this car, loves the color. His daughters are there. They love the color too. And it was really exciting. And they decided to buy the car. And so as we're kind of talking through the process, I'm talking to him about what he does. And he tells me that he sells medical equipment, but that he used to sell bone and tissue with a company in Florida. And I'm not going to name that company because they were involved in a lot of lawsuits around the time that I got my knees, because sometimes when the tissue was harvested from the donor, you know, it's got to get up here really, really fast. They put it on a plane in a cooler and it comes up to Atlanta to be installed. And what was happening very occasionally was that these spores were forming that they couldn't really check for, and that once it was put in, you'd get this terrible infection and generally die. And that's one of the reasons they don't do this surgery anymore, but fortunately mine all worked out pretty well. But that ended up being the demise of this company, and it made him have to go out and find a new employer. But as he tells me all this, I'm just kind of sitting there like, this guy may have been the one that sold my knees. And he said, actually, I was probably the one in the operating room as we harvested them. There were only a couple of guys, and he did almost all the work in that zone in Florida. And so this was the guy responsible for extracting the tissue that became part of me. And so 10 years later, I'm sitting across the desk selling him a Lamborghini. It's one of those things that you never expect to kind of come full circle, but he was excited to see me doing well, and I think he'd enjoyed that part of it. But obviously, in the medical profession, sometimes things go a little bit pear-shaped, and that's what happened. And so he no longer had that job, but he had an exciting new company here in Atlanta, still in the medical space, and was doing obviously very well with it, and he was excited to have his first Lamborghini. And so we developed a great relationship, stayed in touch, went on a lot of drives together. The car, to me, is just the most beautiful Gallardo I've ever seen. I love the spec, I love the color, I love how it works with the lines and the polished aluminum wheels and the yellow accents. I'm very pleased with how it's came out, and I've tried to buy it from him a couple of times, and he loves the car too, so I haven't had any success in doing that. But I love getting to see it when we go out to dinner or go on a drive or wherever it is, and just the way the sun hits that paint is extremely unique. And now, of course, we've seen a lot more Verde Artemis cars popping up on Aventadors and Huracans and things like that, and I love seeing that. I love that the trend is now what we see on Instagram, these really unique specs, these strange colors, this PTS Porsche movement of how prestigious it is to have a really specially colored or optioned or configured car. And I'm glad to see that continue, because generally, yes, not all the market is going to prefer some unique spec, but more people will like it, more people will demand it than there could ever be supply. And so as the cars age, it becomes a really good thing, and it helps you to overcome a lot of other issues the car might have, that you can drive it more, not worry about it, and know that somebody out there is going to love the way it's optioned. And you never know how these interactions with people are going to intersect, from times where you have nothing to do with cars, no interest in cars, but then a decade later, it becomes that. So it was an exciting thing for me to encounter, not the most salacious story to ever come out of the exotic car sales world, but one of those great small world moments.
At Dollar Shave Club, you're always in control. Simply choose the delivery dates and frequency that suits your schedule so you don't run out. Get a shave, shower, or oral care starter set for just $5 at dollarshaveclub.com.